in an unusual weather for this time of the year. Rain pounded city of Delhi, parts of UP, north and even west of India over the last couple of days. On Sunday, several parts of Madhya Pradesh, including Bhopal, Indore, witnessed unseasonal rainfall along with hailstorms. While it's a respite for residents, as India's meteorological department forecasts the temperature to plummet by 9 to 10 degrees below normal, it spells doom for the agri sector. There could be, and there are reports of course, that there could be more damage to the crops if the rainfall continues. With me at this point in time, Rakesh continues to be here in the studio. Rakesh, it is going to be a big bummer for the agri economy at large if the unseasonal rainfall continues.
Absolutely. I mean, for people living in Delhi, I know it's been a bit of a relief, but for the farmers, obviously it's an obvious challenge. To put it in context, Shweta, I just was reading the RBI latest monthly data, which came out 23rd of April, which is just last 1 week ago. They seem to be, cognizant of this, the unseasonal rains and the potential damage it has caused. I'm just reading this one line so that we are able to, we don't need to agree with RBI in whatever it says, but there is a studied perspective versus, random thought that I'm sharing with you. Even if El Nino impacts value added in agriculture, real GDP growth in India would be well above 5.9% projected in the IMF's World Economic Outlook report. Okay. So they have, so to say, and they have identified it as a downside, but downside risk, but not something that's going to totally, take away the, the track that we are looking at. Last year also, if you have noticed that, there were concerns about unseasonal rains in some parts of the country. Unseasonal rains is not a countrywide phenomenon, Shweta. This happens in pockets. In fact, you would have probably encountered, you are in Ghaziabad, and it's raining there, it's not raining in Delhi. So that's happening in UP, Bihar, in the Hindi heartland, where the crop is right now ready for harvest. So it is disconcerting, but is it a challenge which cannot be surmounted? So what we call containment in terms of the overall, overall capability to stick to the numbers that we have projected. Last year we had a 6% surplus, finally, on the monsoon. But yes, Shweta, it's a very, very interesting thing to see, because we might have moved very heavily in the services economy. Dependence of agriculture on 60% of population still is there. So it only contributes about 16 to 18% of the GDP.
That is
so
correct.
If we delink the contribution to GDP vis-a-vis the dependence of agriculture on a large section of this country's population, especially in the rural India, then we have a challenge if it continues to play truant.
Okay, it's a challenge not unsurmountable. It's a challenge we can contain. We have at this point in time Sridhar Srinath Sridharan, I beg your pardon, continues to be with us. Also with me, Karan Mehrishi. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us. First to you, Srinath. Rain is lushing parts of north, west. There are reports of unseasonal rainfall, possible damage to Rabi crop. What sort of impact are you assessing?
See, I think one inflationary challenge, what is it going to happen in case of food damage and crop damage and we don't get the food on the table? Are we going to see price rise, or are we going to also see government intervening in, let's say, the minimum support price to the farmers? That's a question. Two, political one. I mean, we are in the midst of various states going for election. What happens, and what do the state governments jump in? Do they jump in with, let's say, unduly very luxurious kind of economic activity or subsidies for them? Not complaining there, but is it a political messaging, and can they really afford? Can the states really afford? And third, primarily is very, very simple. In case of any of these going forward, what is going to be the consumer or the consumption sentiment? I remember we spoke about it, a couple of days ago, speaking about Q2 and Q3, what is going to be the consumption sentiment? There is a sentiment cascading effect we will have. FMCG companies, people not buying in, and so on and so forth. So I see it as more issue on two types of climate change. Can we become more cognizant and, let's say, at the ground level work on this? If you look at climate change as a macro perspective, I think these kind of unseasonal rains or very, very bad droughts are the effect that we have been expecting all these years. And it's here, it's a reality, including in India and parts of India. So how do we mitigate these and how do we do it? And I think that's where I think some consciousness needs to come. But inflationary pressures, I'm worried about.
Okay, we'll talk about political impact. at this point in time, before we go to the economic impact at large, joining me also at this point in time, Kartikeya Sharma, Executive Editor, TV9. Kartikeya, appreciate you taking time out. I want to understand from you, rainfall, as we were discussing earlier, an unseasonal rainfall does not really impact economy only, it also impacts politics and policy making. In your assessment, this unseasonal rainfall, what sort of impact are we likely to have given the political scenario and the fact that we're going to elections?
I think there are a couple of things. The first thing is that the Prime Minister has taken a global initiative on climate warming, the sort of change in climate and the effect it has on local weather patterns, and he has spoken about it publicly. So if you look at all the international forums in which the Prime Minister has been speaking, he is primarily speaking about how it affects different economies if the climate changes globally. So first of all, he has spoken about that. But the larger issue is that what is now starting to happen, it's like the 1st of May and we have this heavy rainfall. I'm a Delhi boy. I haven't seen a rainfall like this in last 40 years of my life in a city like this. But for some it might be a cooling down of the weather, but for many it is about the way our crops are sold in Western UP, Haryana and Punjab, the granaries, or for example the very famous Malihabad mango. So there are a number of crops which get affected. Yes, in terms of economy, we have cold storage, we can import food stuff, we can buffer this climate change, or we can buffer this anomaly in the weather. But the larger problem here is that in long term it affects the agrarian sector, one. Secondly, it's an election year. There are a number of elections. It's in Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan. You have election in Mizoram. You have elections in Karnataka right now. So it's an election year. You have elections in Telangana this year. And then you have Lok Sabha elections. So any political or social unrest in India, if it emanates from the changing weather, so it's not only about the food security, it affects the political climate also. It's because lack of food security can create both political and social unrest. If you read the books about various food programs which were run in third world countries in 50s and 60s, and these are declassified intelligence papers in America, the necessity did not emanate from the feeling of feeding the poor. The necessity emanated from the fact that if the social unrest continues, then the capitalist order would be threatened and the countries would turn communist. So there is a political aspect to the world food order, and the way Indian agriculture is under stress now in context of water or unseasonal rainfall is tremendous, and it is for this reason you find today that there is great push on part of the central government on millet. Prime Minister leaves no occasion to talk about it. It's not a fad, it's not about losing weight, it's not about gluten-free bread you'll have. It's about that you can do away with these addictive crops which are using 70% of your water. So I mean to say that it's just not about food, it's about political security, it's about social unrest and direct bearing on Indian elections. So I think anyone in the government would be pretty mindful of the fact that as to what is happening in India.
Okay. Rakesh, I saw you nodding at millets.
Yeah, I mean, of course, millets is a positive diversification, but early days, obviously, the scale at which we sow wheat, rice, and millet is an idea in its infancy, but we need many more such ideas. We all keep talking about the VUCA world, and it's become so popular that weather wants to join that club. So in that sense, weather is also playing trot. But I agree with Kartikeya that this particular government has been extremely lucky, Shweta, with two things. It got a great run of monsoon. Monsoon is an imponderable, and if it's plus for the government of the day, whether it's UP or it's NDA. In this case, Modi government has gained immensely from a very stable and positive outlook for monsoons. So if that gets disturbed, as of now it doesn't happen to be disturbed, as I read from the RBI's 1 week old report, they have accounted for it, they call it a downside risk, but they feel it's within the containment zone. And the other good thing that happened with the Modi government was, again, in a macro economy which impacts the common man, is the fuel prices. So, going forward in the election year, he's absolutely right, they would like an environment where especially the rural segment is not put under any undue stress. Now, how do we measure that? One, I said RBI could be wrong in its forecast, which was 1 week old. And this is signed by the deputy RBI governor, not the RBI governor. So it's an approach paper in that sense. It does mention El Nino, but concludes that we will still do 6% growth, which is when the elections are due or the actual voting happens for the general elections. So that's very fairly stable and good news for this particular company if we stay the course. The challenge is that what is the other evidence?
Right.
If the challenge is that this may play tront, the evidence available today from an economic perspective, the corporate results of FMCG companies, which for the last quarter have been looking very good.
Absolutely.
So, and that's one. Both HUL,
And
Nestle, Dabur is awaited. I guess few other companies, I don't have all the details, but they're by and large in the positive zone. Even when market for the last 15-20 days was little, playing range bound, but little below the 61 hit that, we had just before the start of the year. The other indicator is, the one I mentioned, the corporate results. Second is corporate performance on the stock market. On the stock market, ITC, which is said to be what we call the safe and sharif stock, it has done 12.5% growth in the last 3 months. Then, HUL is the only stock which has fallen 3%. But HUL again has a very, very large portfolio, which is not necessarily all agrarian based. So, in that sense, this 3% has to be rationalized in the larger bouquet of products that it has. Nestle is 3% up, 2% up. So, in that sense, looks like that the corporate India is well prepared to bring in, has so to say what we call factored in the Tront monsoon as of now. But both SkyMet and IMD have raised the red flag, but hoping that it stays the course. If it does not stay the course, I completely agree with Kartikeya. It's bound to become an election issue.
Okay.
But if it stays the course, it will be completely off election because even a positive monsoon is not an election issue.
Okay, let me get in Karan at this point in time. Karan Mehrishi joining us. Karan, expectation is, of course, monsoon will be reined in. There are policy measures in place. FMCG sector has reported good numbers, not just in terms of numbers, but also the stock performance. Essentially, all in all, hinting at a sentiment which is positive. But let me just quickly reverse the situation. What if the rainfall continues? We were fearing an El Nino just about a couple of days ago, but now there is heavy rainfall. What is the impact that you are expecting in terms of revenues on farmers? What is the impact on Indian economy in the long run and food inflation? Do you see that being affected if the monsoon continues? The early monsoon as we're seeing right now?
Hi, Shweta. Thanks for having me. So my sense is, if I talk about the El Nino, my sense is that the overall headline CPI number should come down to around 5.3, 6.4%. But there remains a significant risk from the El Nino effect, as SkyMet has already predicted that LPA would be at 10% efficiency. And now various agencies, both in India and abroad, are predicting a 70% chance of the El Nino effect hitting us this season. Based on my experience, what this generally means is that Kharif output will be lower by 9%. Now, it can be lower or higher than this ballpark figure. I mean, that depends on how the situation pans out. But if the irrigation reserves are partially filled due to insufficient rainfall, we may have a bigger problem on our hands. In all likelihood, central and western India may receive less than optimal rainfall, and that will impact Kharif season significantly this year. So it is quite possible that the food inflation may be stoked in FY24. And given the weight of the food inflation, obviously, inflationary pressure is something that we should be very much concerned about. But I also want to touch upon the WPI and the PMI in this context. Statistically speaking, the PMI is lagged by the WPI as wholesale demand influences a manager's raw material purchasing decisions. For FY23, my overall assessment is that WPI will average around 9.2%, with core WPI at around 8.4%. This is actually caused by elevated input prices, and generally it is seen that producers invariably offload this to the end consumer. And this is one of the reasons why core inflation remains sticky at this time. So in FY24, I expect the WPI to fall to around 5.2%, but I'm not too sure whether this will be achieved given the global and domestic uncertainties. And for this very reason, I think that the PMI numbers that have grown very significantly to around 57 may put downward pressure on the overall WPI. Having said so, ignoring a possible base effect, I also think that managers may be hoarding raw materials, especially agro-based raw materials, before fresh produce whose supply is impacted by the El Nino effect hits the market. So it is quite possible that the elevated PMI numbers are telling us a story that it's a one-off event and may not last.
Okay. Okay. Kartikeya, even if, let's say, the unseasonal rainfall pattern continues, and as you rightly mentioned, it's an election year, it's the run-up to the national election year, there is going to be added pressure on the central government, on the state government to make up for compensation losses, help farmers just ahead of the Kharif season, to maybe give them more MSP if push comes to shove, maybe ease FCI laws, take input in terms of low quality grains that will be made available to FCI. There is going to be added pressure all in all on the state government in order to help farmers, because this is going to be an election issue if the unseasonal rainfall continues.
See, the pressure is going to be there because this government has not run on the campaign 2 June ki roti. It has not run a campaign ki har kisan ke ghar pe khana pahunch raha hai. It has created a campaign that this is a government which has empowered the farmers. It has created innovation at grassroots level. It allows them to engage in fields which increases their purchasing power. It's like dignity of life. We are not just giving you lump sum money. You will have a toilet, you will have an LPG connection, you will have basic necessities. The survey of Shamika Ravi, which was on electricity, LPG, toilet, bank account and other things. So the government has operated at a different level when it comes to the agricultural sector. So it's not saying that, well, we will give you this much and you can at least feed yourself. So in context of this aspirational politics, when things slightly move here and there, then you have a political problem, because aspirations have no limit. If you recall, when BJP lost the elections in Madhya Pradesh and briefly Kamal Nath was the chief minister, what was the big issue? Bin Mausam ki Ola Vrishti. Now, Bin Mausam ki Ola Vrishti costed Shivraj Singh Chauhan his election. So, or for example, onions. Sushma Swaraj lost her elections because of onions, and Sheila Dikshit ruled for next 15 years. So it's not as if that the agriculture has not made a difference in Indian political life. I'm giving you 2 examples, or for a third example is, which actually changed the course of Indian history is, which very few people understand, that despite detonating a bomb, despite creating Bangladesh, despite nationalizing bank, despite abolishing privy purse, India underwent high range of inflation in early 70s because of the war, and the food prices soared up. And once the food prices soared up, you had a movement in Bihar which turned into a Navnirman movement in Gujarat, and then Jayaprakash Narayan gave a call for total revolution, and Indira Gandhi lost it and declared emergency. I'm just giving you examples to say that it's not as if that agriculture sector is inert.
It doesn't operate in silos.
It doesn't. A couple of things. I think he's raised valid challenges, but the government has already announced this 80 crore free food for 80 crore people.
80 crore people.
It should have ended because COVID has ended, but they'll persist till the results of 2024 elections are out. So in that sense, the basic menu or the basic staple diet is taken care of. And I do foresee, not that I have any independent knowledge as of now, that the farmer income scheme, because this government steered completely clear of any income scheme, but for farmers, that quota, which is a quarterly payment, is going to double, if not more. So in that sense, they'll try and address. Farmer may still be unhappy, as we saw on the roads of Delhi and 26 January fiasco. So that's again a political constituency, the way the farmer is managed, and that's not one common constituency across India. So there's a northern India farmer, there's a southern India farmer, there's a south maybe between a Karnataka and a Telangana and Andhra farmer. They have different varieties of crops to look after.
And different requirements.
And different requirements. But this uniform income scheme for farmers, which was introduced in 2018 ahead of elections, general elections, will persist, has persisted, will possibly grow, as is the indication. So is this 80 crore scheme. This should possibly mitigate most of the challenges that he mentioned. But who wouldn't love something more?
But I think, on longer run, the IMD had released a report day before yesterday that the rainfall is declining in northeast India. Now, this is something very, very worrisome. And if I look at from the perspective of global economy, this will have linkages issue. For example, from last 10 years, vanilla production is under stress, chocolate production, cocoa production is under stress. Similarly, many things which we take for granted, like a chocolate, becomes very expensive. Places like Madagascar, because of uneven rainfall, they have not been able to do vanilla production properly.
But just to put it in context, I was telling Shweta before you came, Kartikeya, last year also we had unseasonal rains in June, and in the second part of May, and there were a lot of fears, but ultimately we had a 6% surplus monsoon. So what happens is that one, there is no uniform rain across even northern India. Forget about across northern India, across UP or even Delhi NCR region. Second, that there is a what we call balancing of the overall rain output. So it catches up, it consolidates, but in the short run there is a damage. I agree with you.
I think from the business perspective, only thing I would say that I think the biggest innovations will need to be done for the agriculture sector in future now.
We said
And
that.
incidentally, we just discussed that.
Because if you look at the rainfall pattern, generally rainfall in India has been form of a drizzle. It drizzles and it continues to drizzle for days in Kerala. Monsoon is about a constant drizzle. But what is happening in India right now is, which we have started to feel and absorb, is either you have a big deficit of rain for an extended point of time, or you have a downpour, which happened in Delhi today.
Yeah.
So now this is disastrous for agriculture. This is disastrous for urban setup. It creates its own problem. So there is a change which is happening, and I think from the business side, we really need to innovate on the agriculture sector in terms of seeds, in terms of storage, in terms of sanitation, in terms of water storage and its use.
So more startup ideas from agriculture sector as a whole. That's the need of the hour. That's where we have a lag per se as far as more ideas is concerned. Remember, 60% of this country is still agrarian. We are still heavily dependent on agriculture.